men who just at night, men who mean just what they say, the brave men of the Green Beret, silver wings upon their chests. These are men, America's best. 100 men we'll test today, but only 3 with the Green Beret. Trained to live.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Ted Maravilius America First Hour. As usual, I would advise you to get those tape recorders, the video recorders on, and tape the show. We're going to have someone from the John Birch Society, Mr. Harold Shurtleff. What is that organization and what is it not? I very much encourage you to stay for that portion of the show. Also later in the show we'll have Jim Morose with another continuing expose on outcome-based education. I think that's something that's very important, and I hope you stay tuned. My monologue will be short this time so we have more time to spend with this great American guest. So what I'm going to do is just create for you a few sort of disjointed quotes from what I've been picking up in front of with the several publications that I get, and just to give you a little review of the news as I see it. You'll notice here I have 3 bumper stickers about the UN I can't do it. I'm not like Rush Limbaugh. But anyways, you got 3 good patriotic bumper stickers. You'll learn more in these bumper stickers than you would in a high school degree, or even in a college degree for that matter. Ladies and gentlemen, let me first start off the show by recounting what has happened to Randy Weaver. He's the person who the federal government, namely the BATF and the federal marshals, went after because he sold a federal undercover agent a gun that was like 2.5 micrometers too short. This is what happened, and I quote Andrew Arnold. The federal hitmen who murdered Vicki Weaver as she held her 10-month-old baby in her arms in northern Idaho last year may face criminal charges. During an 11-day siege, 13-year-old Sammy Weaver, his dog, and Deputy Marshal William Deegan were also killed. Husband and father Randy Weaver and family friend Kevin Harris were cleared of murder charges in the death of Deegan. The jury believed they acted in self-defense. Well, when you have federal government officials going in and shooting your wife, you know, I would think that they would have the right to defend themselves, especially in lieu of the fact that they did nothing wrong. And that's why they got acquitted, and that's why the jury system is so important. Same thing's happening in Waco, Texas. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an excellent video that we're going to hopefully try to show, whether it be within the format of this show, the Ted Maravilius America First show, or the John Birch Society presents in Danvers or elsewhere. We're going to try to get this video out. It's called Linda Thompson. She's the author of it, and she was able to somehow put together a piece that actually shows the federal government of the United States, the BATF, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, actually using flamethrowers to kill 90 Christian men, women, and children. I said Christian. You'll find out in this videotape that David Koresh never claimed to be God, and it was an absolute lie. You see, this is all spin. This is all a bunch of propaganda. And, you know, Waco, Texas might be very far away, but, you know, I was listening on the radio today. They busted down some guy's door because he had assault weapons. Now, the fact of the matter is, these people are goon squads. They want to take away your guns, not because, you know, they have a legitimate reason, not because these people are crazy, but because they want to take away the right to keep and bear arms. And 3 individuals in history also were very much anti-gun ownership, and they're on my bumper sticker here. One was Joseph Stalin. He killed 50 to 100 million. Second person was Adolf Hitler. He killed, what, 6 to 12 million. And the third was Fidel Castro. I think there's another person on there too as well. All of your totalitarian governments have advocated the eradication of gun ownership in America, and with the Brady bill passing, and with the crime bill, which for the first time outright bans whole classes of weapons, we are in a very close position to be in an actual, not a de facto, but an actual dictatorship where we have the BATF running around serving as the American form of a Gestapo over in Nazi Germany. They're just going in here without warrants, without probable cause, And the way they justify it is they either call the people who they attack, like Randy Weaver, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, drug addicts. They'll just child abuse. Attorney General Janet Reno said that the reason why they had to go in finally to Waco and raid the compound is because there was child abuse going on. Of course, that was actually refuted beforehand, number one. Number two, I would think that burning babies to death is actually a pretty severe form of child abuse, and the federal government did that knowingly by putting in flamethrowers. You should know that. There should be a congressional investigation, and yet they're covering up this whole thing. I don't think the jury, the whole proceedings, I don't think they're televised. I don't think anyone can get in, and they're doing the same thing with Randy Weaver. They're really just covering it up. You need to get to see this tape, Linda Thompson, and I hope to show it to you quickly. I have a few items locally. We'll be hearing about education in this show coming up, especially about outcome-based education, especially about Danvers, where this show is being taped. One of the school committee members, Mary McLaughlin, I think she's the chairman now, she had something very interesting to say, which I think ties in with the actual nature of outcome-based education, i.e. anti-Christian, anti-American. I read from the Salem Evening News. Chairman Mary McLaughlin agreed that the move would not be as simple as 2 days. She said she was personally not ready to vote for the calendar. There was some calendar changes going on. She also added that times are changing and the possibility of holding school on Good Friday should be considered. Good Friday is when we honor the death of the Lord Jesus Christ, who died on a cross so that we could go to heaven and not spend eternity in hell. And I understand that turns the liberal news media and educated stomachs on that, but that's okay because that's the truth. And even though you, the school students, haven't been afforded the opportunity to hear that Jesus Christ died for you on Good Friday, doesn't mean it's not true. Since 1962, when Earl Warren bans prayer from school in the case of Engel versus Vitale, they have taken that truth, which is more important than any other truth. If there's a hell, and Jesus is the only way to avoid going to there, and you're prevented from knowing that, and you die, you're going to spend not 2 years, not 2 million years, but forever in hell. Now you tell me, the next time you look at a liberal educator who doesn't believe in prayer in school, you tell me how compassionate and kind that they are. And when I read things about Mary McLaughlin saying that we should have school on Good Friday, that's not necessarily a mortal sin, but what it tells me is that the respect for Christianity, just our whole Judeo-Christian system, is really going down the tubes along with public education, and outcome-based education is just basically the manifestation of that, and it's just going to just hasten the destruction of our educational system along with our government. I mean, if we do not have educated, the Founding Fathers were one of the most educated people ever to roam the planet. And of course, the Bible is what they first used to become educated. These people were brilliant. Later on in the show, we'll see something about the McGuffey's readers. These little readers that they gave to school children, 4th and 5th grade, college students today could not understand it. Noah Webster, one of our founding fathers, he wrote a good dictionary. All government originates in families, and if neglected, it will hardly exist in society. The foundation of all free government and of all social order must be laid in families and in discipline of the youth. Families are important. That's something I want to convey to you. Something about what we're going to be discussing about later on in the show, it's just a quote. Listen to it. This guy's a good man. His name is McAlvany. I quote, "Today the socialists and globalists who are pushing America toward a socialist police state, not unlike Nazi Germany or fascist Italy, and toward the New World Order, know that before they can impose a Nazi or communist-like dictatorship on America, they must first disarm the American people. The communists disarmed the people before coming to total power in Russia, Red China, and Cuba. The fascists disarmed the people before coming to power in Italy, and the Nazis disarmed the people before coming to total power in Germany." And that actually is true, especially in Germany. In 1938, Hitler passed the Weapons Confiscation Act, and that basically paved the way for the Holocaust and all the other atrocities that happened over in Germany. That's because of gun control. Now keep in mind that Congressman Peter Torkelson voted for one of the most key gun control elements of all time. That's a Brady bill. He'll also probably support the crime bill, which outright bans whole classes of weapons. Now, if you read the Second Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, you will realize that that's illegal. If you see history, as I've been trying to tell you, you'll realize that that's a prescription order for totalitarian government. And I think we need a change. We don't need a Republican version of Bill Clinton. Don't forget, Congressional Quarterly in the Boston Globe stated that Peter Torkelson votes with Bill Clinton 44% of the times, but it's more like 99% on all the major issues. He actually voted for gay marriages in the District of Columbia with your tax dollars. Weird stuff. We need patriots and conservatives in there, not has-been conservatives turned liberal just because of their self-interest and their self-gain. Bill Clinton supports national service. That's fascism. National service, Hitler Youth. That's exactly what it is. Bill Clinton voted for it or supported it, and so did Peter Torkelson. I am rushed. Let me comment on the St. Patrick's Day parade. Before it happened, I told people that this decision was going to go to David Souter, and he would have final decision on the Supreme Court whether or not he would let the Irish veterans march in peace without being harassed by homosexuals. I said David Souter will not do that. He will rule in favor of the homosexuals because he's been quoted he's been stated in the Gay Blade or one of the gay newspapers in D.C. as one of the most pro-homosexual Supreme Court justices of all times. Now, mind you, see, that was a Republican appointment. He also supports abortion on demand. My point is, people like Peter Torkelson, David Souter, Bill Bennett, who despite the fact that he does some good things, says that Pat Buchanan is flirting with fascism. These people are pseudo-conservatives. These people, like Bill Buckley, he supports every single liberal thing under the sun. They aren't true conservatives. They aren't true constitutionalists. You need to measure a person in the political sphere to the degree that he supports the United States Constitution. And you won't know that unless you read it. You won't know that unless you read the Founding Fathers' actual documents and not what the liberals tell you what the Founding Fathers said, because it's all revisionist history. Read the Federalist Papers. You'll find some very interesting things. It's limited government, that's a story, and we have a great show coming up, and I encourage you to stay tuned, take some more notes, and get involved, especially in this outcome-based education battle all across the North Shore, here in Massachusetts and nationwide. We can win this, and maybe we can take this battle and apply it to government, and so we can have control here as individuals and families and communities rather than a stateless bureaucracy. God bless you.
Hi, I'm Jim Morose with today's commentary. When was the last time the Danvers school system instituted a new program and then had to go to a seminar or a workshop to learn how to deal with opposition groups? Basically, if the opposition doesn't have any ammunition or background, it just falls to the wayside and the program goes on because the program is good. But Superintendent Santasanio had gone to a workshop back in November of 1993. I have all the information, and I'm going to put it in the library so people can view it. But what I want to talk to you today is about some of the recent events that stem from the last school committee meeting, which was held February 14th, 1994 in Danvers here. At the end of the meeting, there's an agenda item entitled Items of Interest for the School Committee, the Superintendent, and the Community. At that meeting, under that agenda item, school committee member Steve Williamson read a letter which basically refuted and attacked some Danvers resident who had sent information to some of the parents of Danvers school children, just sending information regarding OBE. Subsequently, after that school committee meeting, there was, I counted at least 10 to 12 different news articles and letters to the editor regarding that letter and in the program of OBE. Subsequently, I went to the school committee meeting held just last week, March 14th, 1994. At the same agenda item, items of interest to the community, superintendent, and the school committee, I attempted to approach the mic and discuss some of the issues that were in the paper. However, my right to free speech at the public meeting was denied, and the meeting was adjourned without me being allowed to speak. I don't know how that ties into some of the information that Dr. Santasanio had learned at the opposition group seminar, but there seems to be a trend. If you speak out against OBE, you'll either be lambasted in the paper, or basically you will not be allowed to speak at these school committee meetings. But at any rate, I did bring a chart here with me today because the topic seems to be OBE. What is OBE? I'd just like to just flick to the chart. OBE as designed in Danvers, I know it's very tough to see, but there are 4 exit outcomes. And underneath each of these 4 exit outcomes, there are subgroups. There are actually 23 subgroups under the 4 initial headings, and each subgroup has its own individual line items, which are the actual outcomes of OBE. There are 83. As you can see, it gets to be extremely busy. You probably can't read it, but I'll try to get this out so people can see it. And if you look at it, we have regular subjects are kind of dwarfed by, I could say this is nothing more than a major bureaucracy and a very cumbersome task to assign 83 line items to each subject. And of course then these may be different for different grade levels, so we may have to multiply this times 12 to get that for each grade level. But as you can see, I was on the original OBE committee, and each one of these line items in this chart, I did a rough draft and submitted it to the original committee, and I never did see anything come out about it, but basically that's our OBE. Finally, I would just like to talk about one of the documents, another document that we have, which is called, it's put up by the Danvers School System, the 21st Century Project, a stand for the future of our schools, the final report. This was put up by the Danvers Public School Systems in October of 1989. And basically, on page 7 under General Environmental Trends, trend number 2, changing family patterns. I'll just briefly read the last 4 sentences. This trend has enormous impact on the educational system, as in A, increasing the demand for daycare services or extended day programs. B, responsibility for more and more family functions, i.e. education, moral development, career development, etc. Being shifted to the schools, increasing social, psychological, and learning problems appearing in the school setting. So that's what's in our Danvers Schools strategic imperatives for the future. And what happened across the country, I've read this before, but now that I found this in our Danvers goals, I just want to read you what happened out in Kansas. This was reported in the Utah Journal on 5/7/93 that there is presently a legislative resolution before the Kansas State Legislature which reads, whereas public schools have become the primary institution for the rearing of children and the transmission of values, and whereas families, churches, and other social institutions are no longer able to successfully fulfill those responsibilities, therefore public schools would be the principal caregiving institutions in this state and shall henceforth exercise final decision-making authority on all matters. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what happens. We open the door with bureaucracies. Can you switch to that chart one more time? You can see this is a bureaucracy. It really takes away and crushes the academics of what we really send our children to school for. And we are basically getting inundated. We are suffering from data overload. There are bills, I can't even find it. It's about a 40, 50-page bill, which pretty much it's the public law for community service programs. This will be, this is what your children will have to comply with in the next few years. Once, I don't know if it's passed or if it's going to be passed, but it's another bureaucracy from state government to federal government, and we're losing local control. OBE, as Dr. Santasanio had stated at the last school committee meeting, is basically a statewide mandate with the Massachusetts Ed Reform Bill, and with the Goals 2000 the federal bill, that is federal OBE. There apparently seems to be no escape. If you have any questions, please call me. God bless you, and good night.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Ted Maravillas America First Hour. Joining me tonight is my guest, Harold Shurtleff, New England coordinator of the John Birch Society. Hal, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me on, Ted.
Now, the John Birch Society, I heard about this about, 4 years ago while I was at college. And I knew it was a conservative group, but I kind of heard some, sort of controversial things about them, and I sort of let it drift until I read a book called None Dare Call It Conspiracy. And then, of course, I went to the American Opinion bookstore, which was was it the headquarters of the
former headquarters
right.
in Belmont, Massachusetts. Yeah.
And I think I met you there for the first time.
That's
and I said, wait a minute, these people don't have horns on their heads. They're actually great Americans. So tell me, what is it with this this controversy, but in juxtapose it to the actual mission and the actual function of the John Birch Society?
Well, the society was founded in 1958 by the late Robert Welch of Belmont. Within the first 2 years of the society, we had some success stories, and that's what led this terrible smear campaign. It's okay in some people's eyes to be conservative-minded as long as you just keep your thoughts to yourself. But when you mobilize and activate people, then you pose a threat to their agenda, to the status quo, what have you. And they don't debate the issue. They just ridicule the individual or smear that person or that organization. And in the early 60s, some horrible things were coming out about us. It emanated from the Communist Daily Worker, or the Daily World, out of California. Now, the average American reading that publication does not read that publication, but if he or she did, he'd say, well, obviously it's coming from this source, it's full of lies. And it said that we were fascist and racist and anti-Semitic, and a good step away from a Hitlerite goon squad, and such nonsense. Well, several months later, a lot of those lies made its way to the mainstream media. And the horrible campaign was waged against us for about 3 or 4 years, up until maybe 65. And what happened was most Americans, being open-minded and patriotic types, they said, well, let's look into this horrible organization. And that's what got me interested. I remember during the Kerry, his campaign, the senatorial campaign, his opposition, Ray Shamey, had been a member, and he went on to smear the Birch Society. He used the word political filth to describe the material. I said, well, wait a minute now. How bad can they be if you have a lot of prestigious members and a lot of good people? I said, how bad can they be? But I knew a little bit about Kerry. I know after he was out of Vietnam, he did serve very admirably. He was aligned with people like Jane Fonda and former Attorney General Ramsey Clark, who's I think quite left-wing characters and very un-American to say the least. So I said, what's his agenda? So I looked into the Birch Society. I read the material, much like you did, and I said, boy, this is not such a horrible organization. And my first chapter meeting was up here, actually in Danvers.
Oh, really?
And I met some fine people. So here I am now, 5 or 6 years later, as a New England coordinator.
Huh. Well, what is the John Birch Society? Is it a political group? What's its function, and what is its goal?
Well, we're not a political group. Our goal is to educate. Now, Robert Welch was a brilliant man, and he student of history, and he was involved in the political process. He ran for lieutenant governor of Massachusetts. He was a delegate to Robert Taft in 1952.
Excellent.
But he realized that without informed voters, you really can't get anywhere. And we could see, you could field great candidates. There's a lot of good people that we would consider good candidates anyway, but they only get 10% of the vote, 20% of the vote. Oh yes, there's some good people in office, but a lot of American people just don't understand. When Clinton comes out with his national health care, boy, that sounds great, we have to embrace it. If the people understood the dangers of such a plan, they would reject it and reject anyone proposing it. So the goal was to educate voters, create informed electorate, and get people to take their citizenship seriously. And because a lot of American people did, and a lot of programs we were able to roll back or to help defeat, this is why the smear campaign. John Birch Society was named after Captain John Morrison Birch, a former Baptist missionary turned soldier. In fact, he was the one who rescued Colonel Doolittle after that famous bombing mission. In fact, there was a movie, 30 Seconds Over Tokyo. They had to bail out over China because the planes couldn't go back to the carriers, and John Birch helped lead these people to safety. And he was a very courageous young man. He was in his early 20s. He spent the whole war behind enemy lines, practically. And 2 weeks after the war had formally ended, after the truce was signed, or the second bomb was dropped, he was brutally murdered by the Chinese communists, whom at that time our media was telling us were agrarian reformers, had nothing to do with Stalin and so forth. And his death was hushed. How he was killed was hushed up. I mean, he was shot in cold blood, and his body was mutilated. But the word did get out, and Robert Welch was doing some research back in '54, I think it was, on in the Senate library. Senator Nolan had allowed him to look into these, and he came across the name. And he was so impressed by this courageous young American that when he founded the organization, he decided to name it after John Birch, with the permission of his parents. In fact, his father just passed away at the age of 99. Long-time member, very supportive of our efforts.
Well, you know, I personally am familiar with other, what I consider great American heroes in the John Birch Society, and the first and foremost person that comes to mind is, I think, a former president of the John Birch Society and a U.S. congressman. Tell me more about this person.
Larry McDonald, you're speaking of,
Yeah.
a congressman from Georgia. Larry McDonald was a 5-term congressman. In the 5 years, 5 terms, 10 years he was in office, his voting record on a constitutional basis was 100%. He was a leader. He was, after he was, his plane was shot down, he was...
You mean Korean Airline 007?
007.
Okay.
The media said that he was most of the pundits in the media said, oh, he was ineffective congressman. He was a tip of redneck cracker, kind of just an insignificant boll weevil Democrat and so forth. The truth was he was probably the foremost leader in the Congress, and he was a Democrat in a very, you know, his party, of course, is very liberal. He was always butting heads with the late Tip O'Neill. In fact, he was the only Democrat who voted against him when he took over as the Speaker of the House. Larry McDonald was able to save the taxpayers millions, if not billions of dollars by fighting some of these ridiculous bills. He helped preserve a lot of weapons systems that were vital to our defense. He founded an entity known as Western Goals. Western Goals was an international and scope private organization, intelligence gathering. It was not a John Birch Society adjunct, although some of our members and friends were also supporting it. And he was shedding the light on our internal intelligence, internal security, and what went wrong, and made a number of videotapes, some of which we've aired here in Danvers over the last several years. Well, after he aired one of his programs, I think it was called No Place to Hide, on national TV in the Southeast, he got aboard this plane, KAL-007. He was going over to Korea, South Korea, to deliver a speech, and he was very beloved by people from all over the world, from Israel to South Africa to Rhodesia.
Oh, wait a minute.
South Korea.
I don't think he was loved by Pravda. They didn't have too many good words to say.
Well, right. He said freedom-loving people around the world.
Right.
And some of his friends advised him not to go. We didn't know what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And the plane was shot down September 1st, 1983. A friend of mine who was a member of his staff said that he got word that the plane had landed safely. And that night and the following day, it had disappeared. A lot of mystery surrounding it. I don't think we'll ever get a clear answer until we have enough courageous congressmen. We don't have enough for an honest investigation.
You mean a congressman of the United States of America, a person who is the head of a conservative anti-communist organization, is shot down, perhaps kidnapped, as the State Department had first stated that the plane had landed on Sakhalin Island, can just go off scot-free without a congressional investigation? What happens if this were to happen to Ted Kennedy? What would happen?
Well, we don't know what would happen, but you can imagine that I'm sure things would be a little bit differently. But I don't think the Soviets or the Russians would shoot down Ted Kennedy's plane. I guess he's too helpful to them, I think.
Those who believe that that is a coincidence, that the chairman of the John Birch Society and a United States congressman who happened to be the most conservative one in Congress is assassinated by the Soviet Union, if you think that that's a coincidence, then you're really not going to, I think, understand that there is a hidden hand in our affairs governing us to the extent that they want a one-world government or socialism here in this country. But to that end, isn't it the task of the John Birch Society to educate people about the issues, about the dangers of socialism? And
when you talk about this in some circles, they look at you like you have two heads. Now, we were talking about this concept of a new world order for many, many years, not just within the last few years when it's been more widely known. And we've been talking about some very powerful organizations that have a lot of political influence that have been setting the agenda. We can look back and see Republicans and Democrats, regardless of who's in office, it's usually the same policy. Maybe not as much with one party versus the other, but the foreign policy is very similar. For example, foreign aid. When it comes to foreign aid to Eastern Europe, to the World Bank, it's almost there's very little opposition in Congress, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat.
Well, just to interrupt you, Hal, our Congressman Peter Torkelson voted for aid to Soviet Russia, as well as extending most favored nation status to the butchers of Beijing.
Sure.
And what's the difference between the two parties if you can't stand on principle?
Exactly.
That's one thing that I like about your organization, is they stand on principle.
Well, let me interject something, Ted. Every 4 years, the major parties have a convention where they draw up a platform. One of our members years ago said, political parties are a lot like wedding gowns. Worn only once and usually fly in false colors. Our political platforms are a lot like wedding gowns, worn only once and usually fly in false colors. Our platform was drawn up when the society was founded. We believe in limited government, the U.S. Constitution as it was meant to be, individual responsibility. So we're very consistent in our ideology. We don't draw a platform every 4 years or every 2 years at our national meetings and say, this is what we're going to do this time. We're going to change things a little bit.
Now, do you have members in all sorts of, races, denominations?
One of the criticisms of the Birch Society is that we are racist, anti-Semitic. We have people from all different religious backgrounds. And Robert Welch, when he founded the Birch Society, was advised that the very fact that the differences in your country, the religious differences, will eventually destroy any of your efforts. So he took that into consideration. And we don't ask people to change their particular religious ideology. It's simply be tolerant enough to work together with other people to preserve our freedom so we can air our differences in freedom.
So in other words, anyone who's really genuinely interested in preserving the republic that the Founding Fathers gave us is welcomed into the John Birch Society.
Exactly.
So when I hear this garbage on local papers at their extreme, basically the chances are that there are a bunch of liberal news media who are absolutely ignorant as to what you stand for.
Well, a lot of the good liberals out there are well-intentioned. I mean, I know a lot of them are. A lot of them think that their agenda is the right thing for the students of this Danvers or for the people of America at large. And any opposition to that must be met with criticism. And obviously, if you're not in that mindset, there's going to be something wrong with you. So you must be attacked. But I want to, again, qualify that. Many liberals I've dealt with are very sincere, good people, and they're also patriotic. And you say, wait a minute, now that's impossible. But it's not. It's not. A lot of columnists have been giving us very good articles, especially in New England. I think a lot of these liberals who were raised in these horrible public schools and educated in these liberal universities, they're always thought to think anti-establishment.
Right.
And they come out and they see their hero, like Bill Clinton, advocating the same exact thing that their enemy, George Bush, was doing. They're scratching their heads and saying, what's going on here? Maybe those people over there in the Birch Society are onto something. We may not agree with everything, but they're definitely onto something.
60 seconds. Can you warn our viewers the dangers of the Council on Foreign Relations, and is not the President a member of this group?
Yeah, he is. The Council on Foreign Relations, in my opinion, is the most powerful private organization. Not to say that every member of it is involved in anything evil, but its ruling members and the top of this organization are. And I get their publication, I read their writings, and they're looking towards building a one-world system. In fact, according to David Rockefeller, it's already in place. We just don't know it yet, you see.
Isn't that the same David Rockefeller that, excuse me, just authored an article in support of NAFTA and actually called it criminal if we opposed it?
Exactly, yes.
And isn't it great that he has liberal Republicans like Peter Torkelson doing his bidding?
Exactly.
While those of us who work for a living are depending upon our congressmen to stand up for constitutional principles of sovereignty, independence, and freedom. What does the John Birch Society have in place to keep these congressmen accountable?
Well, we have a program known as TRIM, and I wish I brought a copy of one in here. I wasn't sure we were going to discuss TRIM. What it is a report card on the congressman or congresswoman. We take 8 of the most expensive votes in the last 120 days, and we let the voters know how he or she voted on these critical bills. We break it down what it costs per household and how they voted. In addition, we have regular articles to educate people, and then we distribute them as widely as we can. And in many areas of the country where we distribute a large percentage of these, the congressmen or women were voted out of office because you had educated voters, strictly nonpartisan.
Excuse me. Well, Hal, let's get into specifics. Here in Danvers, my show, the America First show, first started off with addressing the issue outcome-based education, which obviously should be renamed outcome-based indoctrination. Tell us, what is the danger of this particular program from the National Education Association called OBE, and what is the dangers of allowing our sons and daughters to be exposed to this, and does it relate to a larger picture?
It very definitely relates to a larger picture. We can go back to the Carnegie Endowment Carnegie Endowment and a lot of these large think tanks and large corporations, nonprofit entities that knew that they had to control American education. The 10th plank of the Communist Manifesto calls for free education for all children. Karl Marx knew that if you're going to have a controlled state, you have to control education. Well, a lot of these principal advocates of these are not communist, of course, but they are those who are totalitarian-minded. They want to have control. So they had to get rid of phonetics and replace it with look-say. Now, what's phonetics? Phonetics is where you learn the sounds of the words, because we have a phonetic language, a phonetic alphabet. Today, most schools around the country, probably Danvers as well, uses what they call look-say.
They do here, yeah.
Now, look-say was designed for a very noble purpose, to teach deaf-mutes how to read. Deaf-mutes, of course, cannot hear sound, so of course they had to learn a way to read. That was introduced initially in the 1840s in Boston. The school teachers said, "This is monstrous, get it out," and they did. John Dewey, the humanist, so-called progressive educator, brought it back. He wasn't alone, of course, but he was the principal agent. He was a signer of the Humanist Manifesto 1 and a member of the National Education Association. He lived quite a long time. I think he was in his late 90s when he died, sometime in the 1960s. Wow. And he and his disciples did so much damage to the school system. The Dick and Jane book that a lot of us grew up with replaced the phonetics. And the idea that schools would be a place to inculcate and indoctrinate, not a place to where children can learn skills and values that would help them to make a living. And John Dewey is very much the socialist. In fact, he went to the Soviet Union during the reign of Stalin, and he started introducing his schools. Well, Stalin kicked him out. He said, that method is okay to corrupt capitalist countries, but it's no good here. So he threw him out and put his disciples in Russia and in slave labor camps, I believe.
You know, you said he was a member of the National Education Association. This is the same group that has endorsed every single pro-Soviet, pro-socialist, pro-authoritarian measure that has come down the road. I mean, they are so far to the left that to say that they're liberal is really not an accurate description.
You've got to ask the viewers a few questions about OBE. Did the parents of America, did the parents of Danvers say, look, our kids are reading too well, please dumb them down, please give them something that's going to turn them into little Skinnerian robots? No, of course not. Did the parents of America say, look, we want sex education in the classrooms? You know, our teenage girls aren't pregnant yet, we want this to happen. Of course not. Who's doing it? We dare call it a conspiracy. Did the parents of Danvers want the result? Now, I don't know how bad the Danvers schools are. I went to schools in Boston, the inner city, during the height of forced busing. They took a referendum a year before they implemented federal court-ordered forced busing. 85% of the people in the black and white community said, we do not want forced busing. We want to have better schools. What did they do? Of course, they ignored the will of the people and these academic elitists. Of course, Ted Kennedy was behind it and Judge Garrity, and they just completely destroyed the Boston schools today. And I live right across the street from a junior high school, and one of my friends who lives in the suburbs was over early one morning, and he saw these kids jumping out into the school, and he was stunned. He said, hell, he came in, looked like his best friend was murdered. And he said, not one book, he can't believe it. I says, what did you expect in Boston? $6,000 per student, and they don't even have books.
You know, before the socialist onslaught of the American education system occurred, especially with the NEA, National Education Association, becoming powerful, and with Earl Warren becoming the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and kicking out prayer in schools in 1962, what did our school children used to read? You know, Thomas Jefferson prescribed Bibles for his students in D.C. And what is this stuff that you brought?
Well, let me tell you, the author of the First Amendment, Fisher Ames, said the Bible should be the main textbook. Believe it or not, Alan Dershowitz did not write the First Amendment. It was written by Fisher Ames. He was the principal architect behind it. And of course, under the banner of separation of church and state, that all reference to a God must be removed.
Hell, I was reading my Constitution the other day, and I can't find the word separation of church.
You won't find it in there. You will not find it in there because it's not in there, you see. It's part of the newspeak. We
Actually,
picked
it is
up
part of the Constitution, the Soviet Constitution.
That's right, the Soviet Constitution, exactly. At the time of the founding of the Constitution, Massachusetts had a state church.
I know that.
And we're against state churches.
Yeah.
But the idea was that the federal government would not establish a religion for like the Episcopalian
Right.
Church or the Baptist Church or the Catholic Church.
Right.
It didn't mean that people of religious views and backgrounds could not be part of the political process. Absolutely not. What this here is McGuffey's Readers. And this would challenge the average college student today, probably the graduate student. It was used in junior high schools and elementary schools today. It stressed phonetics. It stressed values. There was a little biblical stories in there, moral stories in there. I read these to my daughter, and she reads them, of course. And each paragraph, there's another word, another difficult word that they have to sound out. They have to know the definition. And there's a list of questions in the back. They didn't worry about how you felt, exit outcomes. What did you think? How do you feel? Are your feelings hurt by something? They really taught you things.
Hal, do you know what grade this was supposed to be, like for the fourth reader?
That was probably the 6th or 7th grade.
I mean, this stuff, I can guarantee you, the person in Danvers High School under this new outcome-based education program, or wherever you see this video, after a couple of years of OBE, would not be able to read a paragraph here and understand it.
They probably wouldn't be able to find the bookcase where the thing is located, never mind read a paragraph.
In those smart students that would have a chance of trying to understand this, one, this will be withheld from them in stuff like this. Of course, that's been going on for a couple, 30 years. But two, they'll be deliberately held back because of this dumbing down of OBE. In other words, the whole class can't go forward until everyone has achieved like a grade 75% or something like that. I really think that that's even more, just as insidious as taking, God out of the schools. What is the solution here?
Well, let me show you another example. This was a Hilliard's Fifth Reader. This was 1863. And in the preface, it mentions the objects of education. It said that inculcate sound morals and patriotic sentiment. Now, of course, I'm sure those of your school committee in Danvers, some of them would say, this must have been written by a John Bircher. And there's such challenging things in here. Poetry, can you get poetry? I mean, I remember my poetry in the 7th grade. It was garbage. It was garbled language. And there's some beautiful essays in here. You wouldn't get this in most public schools today.
Neither will you get the great stories of Horatio Alger.
That's it.
And all of the old stories about our founding fathers. Today, our students are taught that the Pilgrims gave Thanksgiving to the Indians, not to God.
Well, if you read the Mayflower Compact, it mentioned that they were over here to propagate the gospel. Now, that compact, in some recent textbooks, all references to God have been taken out.
So when they talk about conservatives wanting to ban books or Little Red Riding Hood, it's really a lie. It's like 99.9% of the liberals doing it to the conservatives. And you can take a look at 1962 when they started really doing this with the outlawing of God in school. You see SAT scores just go bang. Like David Barton's Myth of Separation, he's documented everything. Everything has gone down morally when we took out, moral principles.
Well, in 1983, there was a famous report on education, and it said that if a foreign nation had done this, what we've done, it would be considered an act of war. And there's a joke where a fellow goes into a restaurant, he reads a newspaper, and there's a young high school graduate next to him. And it's a little story about where we ranked 19th in math scores. U.S. students ranked 19th in math scores. And he's lamenting to this young fellow. He says, isn't this terrible? We spend all this money in education in this country, more than any other nation in the world, but here we are 19th in math scores. They said, this is terrible. And the guy said, yeah, it's terrible, but at least we're still in the top 10. You see, that's how bad things are.
Yeah.
And some of these educators, one of the fellows who's a Harvard, one of these persons that designing OBE, and I can't recall his name.
Bill Spady?
Not Bill Spady. He said about handheld calculators. If you have a handheld calculator, you don't really have to know figures. See, the old way was rote memory, and thankfully, I learned rote memory. I still know my tables, and it still comes in handy today.
3/4 of what I've learned about the American government and our history has been outside the classroom because they're just going to withhold it to you. And I learned that in college. And some excellent books that were provided to me by people, who cared about me and who wanted for me to realize what I have not been taught. And so we need to circumvent the public schools.
Precisely.
And at least it seems to me that your organization, the John Birch Society, is one way we can do that. specifically, what do you have? Do you have books, tapes?
Well, we publish a
or-
magazine called The New American, which, by the way, is available here at the library. We have a summer camp for children, for high school and junior high school age children. Oh, this is our magazine, The New American, published bi-weekly.
Hal, just for your information, and also for you viewers out there, we do have the New American in the Danvers Library. If you're listening to this in Danvers, I highly recommend you going in and taking it out. We had an excellent issue recently about Bob Dole and pseudo-conservatives. That's a big issue with me, Hal. People who are Republicans, but unfortunately they act like liberals. Just like you were saying before, there's really no difference between the leaderships of the two parties. What can we do to realize, recognize a constitutionalist, a patriot, a conservative, between that person and a person who is a fake, and a person who is just self-interested and self-motivated?
You could look at, well, for example, we publish their voting records. Not their rhetoric, but rhetoric you can't really tell. There are a lot of people who sound great, but you go to and look at how did they really vote on these key issues? And you get a guy like Gingrich, for example, who's supposed to be the hard-lining right-winger. His voting record is not all that impressive. He's probably a moderate conservative.
Right.
Maybe on a scale of 1 to 100, he's a 60.
Yep.
Where a Phil Crane type would be 95 to 100. Right. So there's a lot of difference between the two.
And incidentally, Peter Torkelson, our congressman, on a scale of 0 to 100, be like 10.
No, I think he's a little better than that. His last index was not that great. I want to be fair to the guy now. Yeah. He may not be fair to the taxpayers, but in all honesty, he's probably a moderate.
Well, do
now,
you know,
I'm taking the most hardest liberal,
Yeah.
Joe Kennedy, for example, and the Phil Crane, and he's in between, which is no place he's supposed to be if he calls himself a champion of limited government.
Would you know that the Congressional Quarterly actually states, right there in writing, the Boston Globe picked it up, that he's voted with Bill Clinton 44% of the time?
Yeah,
and on the major issues, NAFTA, gays in the military, gay marriages in D.C., foreign aid, MFN status, got Brady bill, he's been with him on all the major bills except for the tax hike.
Yeah.
You know?
Which was really divided among party lines.
Right, right.
Yeah, well, the people of this district voted him in, and the idea is to put pressure on him.
Yep.
A lot of these people really stand for nothing. They wear nice suits, they comb their hair nice, and they talk smoothly, and they feel very important. They go down to Washington, D.C., they're asked to come on C-SPAN and asked to come on talk shows, and they feel like they're really doing some great service to their constituents. But the idea is they work for us. And the minute we have to have that attitude. Now, that article that came out in the Salem Evening paper a few weeks ago about our Birch chapter here in Danvers mailing out articles. Well, just the audacity of an elected official paid by the taxpayers. I don't know what a school committee member gets.
I mean, a school committee member here in Danvers, was
Yes.
his name Mr. Williamson? Or
Williamson.
something?
He came out and he berated the chapter for simply mailing out material to the parents of the parents who have children in Danvers schools. The audacity of this fellow.
Well, what was he worried about?
Good question. See, that's a good question. I'm glad you brought that up. If the material, as he claims, are nothing but right-wing propaganda, I can't remember some of the adjectives he used, but they weren't very kind. The average person in Danvers would just simply say, well, obviously, this is a lot of right-wing hogwash, full of lies, and I'm going to can it, you see. But I think he was really concerned.
Well, it's funny because Governor Wilder of Virginia, not necessarily a person that we would consider a hardcore right-winger, with the stroke of a pen, did away with outcome-based education in the state of Virginia because he knew his political career was on the line. The parents down there knew OBE because they realized quite clearly that the goals are the same in Massachusetts and Virginia and elsewhere, and it's just a liberal, political correct hogwash and the control that is just being, packaged.
It's much worse than just political correct hogwash.
Yeah.
Now, in the article, Mr. Williams was asking what Birch Society members or specific member liked or was against. He said B.F. Skinner. So obviously he's in favor of B.F. Skinner. Well, maybe most people don't realize who B.F. Skinner was. Harvard psychologist. He wrote a book, Beyond Freedom and Dignity, where he said, to paraphrase it, that peace, that freedom and dignity were obsolete entities. He also divined a little what they call a baby box. He wanted to raise little children in these baby boxes. He was a monster, a megalomaniac. So yes, of course, Mr. Williamson, we do oppose B.F. Skinner. UNESCO was another thing that he said, well, we oppose that. Isn't it horrible? UNESCO advocates a worldwide control of the media.
We got out of UNESCO in '83.
We did, right. Now, you think, is he in favor of that? Obviously, he must be, but I'm assuming he doesn't know all the things there is to be about UNESCO. And I'm not trying to, he's probably a well-intentioned person that thinks that this is just great, and he figures, well, I'm not supposed to have any opposition. The people are supposed to bow to us blindly, you see. And it's a little bit of a terrorist tactic. You know how the liberals talk about eco-terrorist and or political terrorists and always, you know, knocking conservatives for their opposition to their goals. What if a citizen in Danvers has a right to object? You know, there's not a problem with that as long as it was done tastefully. Nobody was advocating any violence. We simply mailed out this reprint on outcome-based education, well documented, well researched. The man who wrote this article has been following the education for over 10 years. He's an expert in his field. He was taking their own writings, very well researched. He wasn't making things up or his free right-wing imagination. Very well documented, well researched, and he dismissed it. Now the man, Williamson, did not come out and refute any given statement. He just had a blanket refutation of the whole thing without saying, well, B.F. Skinner really didn't say this, or Bill Spady didn't say this or that. Here's one of the persons, the principal architects, is Shirley McCune. In this article, she says, what we're into is a total restructuring of society. Yes, that's what we're against. You better believe we're against it.
In other words, they're trying to they want to remove the parent as the authority figure and make us into the state.
Well, Ted, traditionally speaking, the parents are the primary teachers in the Judeo-Christian concept. You look at the book of, I think it's Proverbs. The parents are the primary teachers.
Train up a child in the way he should go.
And he'll never depart.
Yeah.
The educators, we pay them. Obviously, not every parent in the world in this country can afford to stay at home or teach their children. So the idea is we will hire people to do that for us. And over the years, the concept that the children belong to the parents and the teachers are simply those who teach them math or science or whatever subjects. Today, the concept the state controls the children. That's very dangerous thinking. And it took a while, it took many decades of this evolution of thought, if you will, to change. And up in Maine, for example, Shirley Adamson, she took her kids out of these public schools. They offended her morals and her religious beliefs. Her kids were scoring 2 or 3 years higher in the SAT scores than, I think they were 7th and 8th graders. They were excelling. That wasn't good enough. The state put her in jail, and they said, we have to make an example out of her.
And yet, isn't that the same thing what they're trying to do now with H.R. 6, which is National Outcome-Based Education, which I'm sure Peter talks and supports? They actually defeated an amendment that would protect homeschoolers and private schools from this amendment. In other words, they wanted the federal government to basically wipe out private education. I mean, this is like an onslaught.
That amendment was pulled out,
yes,
thanks to the people around the country who made phone calls and sent letters. So that was a good victory. It wasn't a big victory, but it was a victory nevertheless.
Should we have some type of forum? I mean, how would you be willing to come here and to debate some of these issues with the school committee?
I would love to. Mr. Williams said, challenge us. He said, would love to have a debate. I called him on the phone, left a message on his machine, never called me back. I had a letter in the newspaper, never called me back, so maybe he doesn't want to debate it. Maybe he's a little reluctant to really face the out, because we know we have the facts.
Right.
We'll see.
Well, Hal, we only have about a minute or two left. This may not seem a related topic as to what we were just discussing, OBE, but I'm convinced, as I know you are, that this is part of a bigger scheme. Could you, in about a minute, tell us what is a scheme? Is there a direction to all of these left-wing assaults on America?
Well, in this OBE, you hear a lot about global education, world citizenship, and that is the bottom line. Their goal is to complete eradication of the national sovereignty and the emergence of our nation into a one-world system. It's been coming about slowly for many, many years now, and it sounds fantastic to the persons who haven't been exposed to this. So I say to those people who think this is nuts, this is right-wing nonsense, get a hold of us. Give me a call. You can call my Boston office, 617-361-5066. I hope maybe you can put this on the end of the tape, 361-5066, Boston 617 area code, and I'll get you information on any topic that I've addressed here today. And I'll have an open mind. And if it's such horrible propaganda, you'll know it right off the bat. You'll look at it and say, I'm going to dismiss it. But if there's something to it, we encourage your participation. We need more people getting involved. And the solution would be to first understand the problem in education and other issues. And I think that once the parents do, they'll start pulling some of their kids out of these schools. And the challenge is, if there's real freedom in this country and in Danvers, let the parents who want OBE have their schools, and let the parents who don't want OBE have theirs.
Right.
We'll see which one does a better job, and I challenge them to do that. And I'll guarantee it that the schools that have traditional phonetics, that have respect for moral values, will surpass. You won't find rapes, there won't be murders, there won't be drugs in those schools, but those OBE schools, I guarantee there will be.
Hal, will you just simply close with the motto of the John Birch Society?
Our motto was less government, more responsibility, and with God's help, a better world.
Well,
Doesn't sound too radical, does it?
not to me, and I think the truth speaks for itself, and I would encourage you viewers out there to write to me or to call Hal's phone number. Say, look, I want to find out more information, because you're not going to get it from the Danvers Herald, and you're not going to get it from the Danvers High School Library. I would like to thank you, Hal, very much for coming over. I thank you for your courage and for your educational endeavors, and we hope to maybe have you on again as a guest on our show, and maybe even in an educational forum on outcome-based education. And ladies and gentlemen, I would just like to say that I hope you have a nice night, and may God bless you. Thank you.
The preacher man says it's the end of time, and the Mississippi River, she's a going dry. The interest is up and the stock market's down, and you're only getting mugged if you go downtown. I live back in the woods, you see, my woman and the kids and the dogs and me. I got a shotgun, a rifle, and a four-wheel drive, and a country boy can survive. Country boy can survive. I can plow a field all day long. I can catch catfish from dusk till dawn.